All right, welcome to another episode of the Doomer Optimism podcast. My name's Donald. I'm a first-time host, and I'm joined today by Ashley Colby, who's hosting with me, and we have a special guest, Keturah, who I'm going to let her introduce herself, but some people say that the age of adventure is dead, and that everybody is fully captured by by the system, but it's not true, as you'll hear soon. There's still a lot of adventure to be had. So, Keturah, could you introduce yourself and kind of a little bit about who you are, and then we'll have a conversation.
Yeah, totally. So my name is Keturah, and I don't know exactly where to start, so I'll just shoot out a bunch of random stuff. I'm the oldest of 12 kids, and we were homeschooled. I'm part of a larger family. I have many, many, many aunts and uncles, a lot of cousins. I'm the oldest of all the cousins. I'm almost as old as some of my aunts. But back in the 30s, my great grandfather decided that he wasn't going to join the rest of the crowd during the Great Depression when they set it for Social Security. He thought it was going to turn into something really bad, and they all thought he was super eccentric and crazy for it. But it's proved out that while some of his reasoning may have been a little bit whacked, that it also was founded in some reason, and it's proved to be kind of nice for a lot of us. So I'm fourth generation now. I don't have a social security number. I don't have a birth certificate, and it hasn't hindered me in any way whatsoever. I have banking, I travel, I have a passport, I've lived in Germany for 6 months. And that mindset that he instilled in us and gave us has allowed for us to become more creative. I feel like we make better money because of it, because we're forced to be more creative and find ways to do things in a legal way that benefits us, but we still come out on top. I feel like we just run our own businesses, and we are forced to be more skilled, more efficient, reliable, flexible, all those things that you want in order to have a good business. Anyways, those things just naturally come with that sort of experience. Like during COVID, for instance, while everyone else was like staying at home and bemoaning the fact that they couldn't do anything, I was just like, well, let's see what I can do. I've never all of a sudden I couldn't fly, and that was my like number one way of traveling. So I just bought a $500 piece of junk car and decided to see how far I could make it. The mechanic told me I would make it 100 miles outside of Montana, and I made it all the way to New York. And I've made it to New York like 3 times since then. But just like that same spirit that he instilled in us, I was able to like carry forward in other ways of life, like car camping for months at a time. I just got back from a 5 month road trip where I visited a lot of different sorts of people, went to dance camps, went to folk schools, camped in my car, visited friends, visited strangers from Facebook, all sorts of crazy fun stuff. But yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Cool. And you grew up and live in Montana?
So we were actually raised in Missouri until I was 16, and then we moved out to Montana when I was 16, and I've been here since. Most of my family, like my grandparents and my aunts and uncles and most of my cousins, are still in Missouri and Arkansas.
So what are like, can you walk us through, first of all, when you have a baby in your family, is there like an option to apply for the Social Security card? And is everyone just declining it? Is that like the family culture? And then just like walk me through some of the practical realities of not having
Yeah.
a Social Security number. Like I can't even really wrap my head around it because it seems like so ubiquitous to me when
Mm-hmm.
you reach that roadblock, like, oh, okay, write your social security number so you can do X, Y, and Z thing. Like, then what? Like, what happens?
Yeah. So the ideal situation for a birth is to have a home birth that's unassisted or assisted only by family members or by good friends. A midwife is actually just as dangerous, if not more dangerous, than a hospital birth, just because midwives are like really caught. Most midwives, because I've been traveling and speaking, I've now connected with a really good group of midwives. But the majority of midwives are so confident in the system that they automatically think, oh, if we don't get this baby signed up right away, then we'll lose our licensing as a midwife. Doctors are a little
Right.
bit more like they just don't care as much, and it's a little bit easier. We've had I think 2 hospital births. I forget how many hospital births. But we've had 2 hospital births because my mom's health, like there was complications and stuff, and it just wasn't safe to have those babies at home. And we had less trouble. We've had 1 or 2 midwives with a couple of births. We had way less trouble in our hospital settings than we did with the midwives, just because in the hospital we were like, oh, we'll take that paperwork home, and then we never fill it out. Yeah. But a midwife is like harassing you every like week. She's like, have you filled out that birth certificate? Yeah, I need to send it in.
Yeah, and then like a doctor too, a lot of times like you'll just get whatever doctor's on rotation, and they're like there's no one doctor that's really responsible. It's just like they just don't really care. The nurses are the ones really paying attention. So yeah.
Sure. And if you have a good relationship with the nurses, then it's a little bit easier. So there are people who have bad hospital experiences with not getting their kids socials. And the reason this is, and I talk about this a lot, like before I advise people to not get a social, first work on your attitude. Are you a pleasant person? Are you just out there looking for a fight? If you're looking for a fight, then yes, the midwives and the nurses and the doctors are going to headbutt against you. They're going to be like, this person is crazy and they should not be allowed to keep their kid. And it's not because you're not giving your kid a social, it's because you're crazy. You know what I mean? So like, just be less crazy. Don't go out there looking to preach to people. Be pleasant, be flexible, know what you want to do, but say very little about that. And just go along with it. Like take that paperwork home, but don't be like, oh, I'm going to take this paperwork home and I'm never going to fill it out because you guys are all like workers of the devil. Like that's not going to help your cause, you know?
Yes. No. Oh my gosh. This totally tracks for me. Just like in general, for me going against whatever the grain is, it is better to just be pleasant and say as little as possible to get whatever you need to have happen as like with as little resistance as possible. And it's just so funny that you say that, because I do think a lot of people who might be drawn to living without a social security number might also be like the cantankerous I want to fight you types, because they're just like, they're swimming against this, they're swimming upstream typically. And so it's funny, it actually kind of forces you to be a little bit more pleasant of a person to get by.
Mm-hmm. And another thing I like to tell people is just to refocus. This isn't about making yourself safer from the government. It's about giving your child a different lifestyle and a better lifestyle. And this is a very important distinction, because if your focus is on, oh, this is going to make my child safer, then it's not going to make your child safer. In this day and age, well, in any day and age, we're never 100% safe from the government. Before socials existed, they still took away people's kids and did horrific things with their kids. The socials haven't changed that, and not having your kid in the system does not make your kids safe from the system. CPS can still take away your kids with or without a social, and there's just no guarantee against that. What's a better guarantee is having a strong community where people love you and like you, and realizing that I can raise my kid and equip them with the sort of tools that I think that would help them have a better lifestyle, whether that means keeping them separate from the IRS so they get to keep all their money when they grow up, and giving them passports and banking accounts so they have ways to utilize their freedom. I mean, like, I don't like passports and driver's licenses because I feel like those are still sorts of like entrapments, but there's like some things, I don't know, like I haven't even figured out how to do, like my grandpa's figured that all out, but it works for him, it doesn't work for me, kind of thing. But yeah, so like just figuring out what works for you and makes you have that sort of lifestyle that's actually more freeing and more joyful, rather than having a fear-based decision, is a much better approach to this whole like living off grid without a social.
Yeah, I watched a talk that you gave on this subject about not having a fear-based mindset, but having a focus on you should make your decisions based on positive desire.
Yeah.
For freedom and adventure, not for fear. And I think it's excellent advice for pretty much anything, for literally anything that anyone does in life. That if you go into anything with a fearful mindset. Anyway, I'm curious how, and it's okay if you don't want to talk about this, but I'm curious, having this, it sounds like your family culture is great and really interesting, of whether there has been problems dealing with 3-letter agencies and that kind of thing.
Dealing with what was that last part? Dealing with
Dealing
what?
with 3-letter agencies, you know, whether there has been problems with that.
Yeah. So we have never had any sorts of problems with like IRS or anything. I even before I got my driver's license, the DMW, whatever you call that place, I always forget the order of letters.
DMV.
DMV, yes.
It's so funny that you don't even know that. That's like it's like so ubiquitous in everyone else's life.
No, I'm rather ditzy in general. Like I travel all the time, but I still can hardly tell east from west. I have a ditzy personality.
I love that.
Ditzy where I want to go though. No. So anyways, when I first went into the DMV to get my driver's license, the lady just didn't believe me. She's like, "There's no way that you don't have a social security number. Everyone has a social." And I was like, "There's no way I have one. I have never stepped inside of a hospital or a school. Like there's no way I could have a social." And she's like, "Well, you got to prove it to me." I was like, "Okay, how do I prove it to you?" So I had to go to the IRS office and I had to ask them to look me up in their database. And they looked me up. And of course, I wasn't in their database. So I asked them to print out a letter stating that I wasn't in their database. And they printed out that letter, a paper saying I don't exist. And then they asked me, "Would you like to sign up now?" And I was like, "Oh, no, thank you. I just took my paper and I left." So that's the only confrontation, or not really confrontation. That's the only interaction I've ever had with the IRS. My dad has done a lot of construction over the years, and he's worked for a lot of big like corporations, and those types of people don't always want to pay a smaller guy like that. That in general, a lot of construction guys have that experience. Like it's a really bad idea to work for a corporation, and like you don't have a lot of leverage to make sure that they pay you. So he's had some of those types of issues where he hasn't been able to get paid, or if he wanted to pay, he had to like figure out some way to get through these like loopholes to get him past the like the tax numbers and stuff. But he's been able to mostly figure it out or stay away from it just because like we have a harder time getting paid. But it's not because of the IRS, it's because of like the corporations and all the laws that they have that kind of protect them from not having basically smaller people just don't have much of a say in whether they get paid or not. Gotta hope you work for a corporation that has some decent values.
So it seems like one of the main barriers you face is just getting paid. Because I can imagine a lot of times they say like, "Yeah, what's your social security number so I can sign you up as an employee?" Like I filled out, like just in order to get paid for different things, you have to fill out some kind of tax form. So you'd have to be working with people who are willing to work outside that system.
Yeah.
And is that, I mean, without, I don't want you to tell us that you're doing anything illegal and get yourself in trouble, but is it legal to do that? Like to just work with people?
Everything we do is 100% legal. It sometimes might be illegal for someone else to hire us, but because we work as private contractors, it's not illegal. It's never illegal to hire a private contractor, no matter if they was social or not. If I were to work for like McDonald's or for Walmart, which I've never tried to because I've never wanted to make that little bit of money, like all my options have always been way more than that. If I wanted to work for a smaller wage like that, I would have to find some way to like be hired as like an illegal immigrant, which is another thing I talk about. Like a lot of my loopholes are the same loopholes illegal immigrants use. And in many ways, illegal immigrants are one of the ways that like American dream and liberty is kept alive in America. And a lot of people don't want to recognize that fact, but it's actually true. Like they keep a lot of smaller Americans thriving because of the loopholes that are created for them. But yeah, private contracting is 100% legal.
Cool.
You still have to think a little bit outside of the box because a lot of people aren't accustomed to private contracting unless they're like corporations or such. A lot of smaller businesses aren't necessarily sure what private contracting means, and they think like the first thing they ask is, "Am I working under the table?" Like that whole mindset again, like this of that. And I have a whole like spiel I give about like working under the table because I absolutely do not like that way of thinking, because you're saying that this table doesn't belong to you, it belongs to the IRS or to the government or to the Fed or something. And like, no, we're Americans. The table belongs to us. It doesn't belong to Rome. It belongs to us. This is our table. is our money and our bread, and we're not supposed to be giving anything to Caesar because Caesar lives in Rome and we live in America. You know what I mean? Like, this is our table. But yeah.
Okay, so it seems like I'd love to hear a little spiel about like just what underlies, like it's obviously just like it's fundamentally it's both sides of the coin, distrust of the government, like the government isn't really on our side. There's some safety issues, and like some people might say that's wacky, but you hear these stories about like, I mean, I studied the sociology of the family. You hear these stories about kids getting taken away that are just absolute horror stories. And a lot of times it is like government sponsored trauma and violence. So that's, that is legit. But I'd love to hear like both that, a little spiel on both that distrust side of the coin, and also like a little more about the freedom it engenders. And not, I think I kind of hear you saying it's not just freedom, it's also like an invitation to agency, like an invitation to freedom, to adventure, to like living outside certain narrow parameters that like, these institutions determine that your life gets to be inside of.
Yeah. So I could answer this in a couple different ways. It also largely depends upon the family. I say that my one advantage to my lifestyle and my upbringing was the fact that I had a good father, and most people who are raised this way do not have a good father. They're taught, oh, I'm giving you liberty, but then the kids get to be 18, 19, 20. They're like, oh, I'm free, but I'm free to do what? Like stay in this garbage can? I'm free to do absolutely nothing. And I mean, I kind of had those similar feelings when I was 18, 19, 20, because my dad is like a very good man, but he's also a little bit, what do you call it? Going with the flow, easy going. He's like, oh yeah, we're going to help you get your driver's license someday. And I was like, someday should have been like 4 years ago. So like, I had to like get out there and be like, okay, Dad, I'm getting my driver's license next week. Can you just like drive me? I made the appointment. And like, I was forced to be a little bit more like, this is what I'm doing. Are you going to help me do it? But my dad was a sort of guy who was like, oh yeah, I'll take you in there. Whereas a lot of fathers of these types of fathers have been like, what's your problem? Like, no, you should not be doing this. If you do this, I'm going to excommunicate you and never have anything to do with you for the rest of your life. And therefore, like the difference is my dad actually told me like, you're free, use this freedom. A lot of what we call sovereign citizen families, which we don't identify as sovereign citizen. We think of that as an oxymoronic term. But like a lot of sovereign citizen families are similar to us. They don't actually equip their kids with the tools of being free. They just tell them that they're free from the government, but that they live under the bondage of the father for like the rest of their lives. And I think the government kind of sees that, and they see and I'm not saying this is a good thing at all that the government interferes with this still, but they see this and they prey in that type of like family situation that's dysfunctional. And it's not because of the social, it's not because of the birth certificate. It's because there are dysfunctional families that attract some sort of community member, concerned community member. They're like, oh, this family is super unhealthy. Do you see what they're doing with their kids? Or one of the kids snaps and turns to the whole family. But somehow the family gets turned in, whether it's from one of the older kids or it's from a community member, a school board member, someone who works in CPS. They see an issue in its family and they blame it on the social security number or like a specific eccentricity of the family. And they don't look at the larger picture that it's just that they have a bad father, and it has absolutely nothing to do with the specifics upbringing. It's like those things attract like bad fathers who want to like control their families. Those things are attractive to them because they're better tools for that. But those tools themselves aren't bad things. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, so like I definitely had some of those. Like it's still I think it's just like how all young kids feel when they get to be like, late teens, early 20s. They're like, okay, my family's crazy. What am I going to do? Like, and I had like those decisions where I love my family. So like, I also recognize the fact like, oh, my family's a little bit crazier than I always thought they were. Like, what am I going to do with this? Am I just going to like live at home and be content? I was like, absolutely not. Cause like, we were also raised to be very independent and very creative. And so like, I'm not going to just live at home forever and be content. I have to like do things. Like I have visions, I have dreams, I want to do stuff. And so I had to like start thinking outside the box, like how is there a way for me to honor my grandfather's traditions, my great grandfather's traditions, my father's ways, the way for me to honor this and still live a life where I feel like I'm not trapped because of these like heritage things. And that was a really hard thing for me to walk for a time, because at that point in time, we weren't sure how to get banking accounts anymore. Like back after 9/11, a lot of our loopholes and routes of doing things were like, we just didn't know how to do it anymore. So like my dad didn't know how to get me a driver's license. That was all test ran. I didn't know when I signed up for a passport if I would be able to get it or not. That was a 2-year process for me to figure out. My banking account, I didn't know if I could get that or not. Like those were all learning curves. Once I got past them, it was easy for the rest of my siblings, and it's been easy for people I've come into contact for them to do it, because like I just shared the loopholes that I discovered.
I imagine once you get a passport, that pretty much allows you to do almost anything.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, there's a lot you could do with a passport.
Like a passport trumps all other forms of identification, kind of.
It really is. It's like the one size fits all kind of thing. It has 9 digits, so like if you like, there's a lot of banks and a lot of places allow you to like use a passport number in place of a social, just because it has the 9 digits, and it's like what they use for like illegal immigrants and such. For people who don't have socials, are like, oh, we'll just use this, and this will get you into our system. Not all banks allow that, but like a few big banks allow that. Yeah.
So I'm curious then. I'm sure you've had this question a million times. Like, so is I mean, do we need government for anything? You know, I mean, what does your family have a vision for the benefits of having government? Like, what is the perspective there?
Yeah. I mean, I run in a lot of different circles. I'm affiliated with a lot of local political grassroots parties, and I've done a lot with like libertarianism. I sometimes identify myself as an anarchist. I not like the chaotic kind. I just like the kind that you're like, oh, I can take care of myself. I don't need someone else telling me what to do.
Mm-hmm.
In a lot of ways, I'm anti-establishment. Like I'm Christian, but I don't like a lot of churches. I don't like a lot of I just don't like a lot of systems in general.
Mm-hmm.
I like the family system, and I like that unit, as long as it allows for like freedom and growth. Even the family system can sometimes get a little bit too restrictive, you know. But I mean, at the same time, I don't know. Like I guess we need some sort of government, but I'm not sure that we need it near as much as what we have. I feel like people are a little bit more prone to organization than, especially when they have like good schooling and good education and stuff like this. And this is stuff that as a community we could all be giving more. Like I'm really for community, I guess. Like we don't need government doing as much as what we could be doing. Like each of us individually could be doing more to share with our community. We'd be sharing our skills more. We could be like hosting little things that like just spread hospitality and spread skills, and like sharing what we can through educational, whether it's like math or English, you know, like and if you're really good, like my brother just joined our local fire department, which is a completely volunteer thing. It's not government at all. It's just everyone just gets together, and they are our fire department for the area around where we live. Like I'm really for about things like that, just small community oriented things, and then people care more, you know, like if this is your community and you're part of your community fire department, then you really care about the fires that happen around you. If it's like some larger fire department in the city, they're just like there to watch the house burn down because that's what they're paid to do. I don't know.
Yeah, I think for me I think the pendulum is so far in the direction now of like outsourcing so much of our daily life and agency and freedom to governments or corporations or other people that we don't even see on some global supply chain line, that like swinging it back in the other direction toward agency and self-governance and like community, like capacity, like that sounds so good to me. I think it's just definitely needed, and I think a lot of people, like your example is like a far end of that pendulum swing, but it's very instructive to teach us like how it's possible really to do a lot of governance and make do with a lot of stuff ourselves, like individually within families, within communities. So that's cool. Donald, sorry, I took your turn. I didn't even have a question, just a statement.
Could you talk about your education growing up?
Yeah, that'd be a fun topic. So, we technically were homeschooled, but now looking back, I I love education. I want to write my own homeschool curriculum someday. I just love school and education. For the most part, we were homeschooled. But my mom and dad, they had decent educations. They both were homeschooled also. But back in their days, especially in dad's, like it was where he lived, it was a little bit more illegal, and they were always like on the run, scared to be turned into the CPS because of their homeschooling. Um, my mom had more of a typical Mennonite type education, and I think she got like maybe eighth grade education, which is really like their eighth grade education is higher than most high school educations. And then my dad's education, they didn't really do grades, and grandma I don't think put a lot of focus into it, but he still was able to, he got like what he needed. So yeah, my mom though, she taught us, and it was because there were so many of us and there were so many different issues in our family. Some of us like got more attention and others got less, which was fine with some of us. Like a couple of my siblings had dyslexia, and my mom spent a lot more time with them, teaching them. My own personal experience was very different. There was like a little bit of headbutting between my mom and I growing up, and I really, really liked school, whereas she thought I was putting too much focus in school and becoming this feminist, and I would want to do all this crazy stuff. And Keturah, you should just like focus on making this bread and cleaning this house because you're going to grow up and be a wife someday. And I was like, I'm never getting married. I wasn't like serious. I was just, an antsy teenager who was like, if my mom says that I need to get married, then I'm gonna like
do the opposite
nap instead.
Yeah.
So and like it would be like that type of thing where sometimes she'd like, oh, you shouldn't be doing so much school. So I'd get up early in the morning. Like my normal routine was to get up at 5 o'clock and do a couple hours, maybe like 3 hours or so of school before breakfast, at like 8 or 8:30, just so that way she couldn't ground me for my school. When I was like an early teenage, like 13, 14, 15, we lived the Amish for a few years. And during that time, because we didn't actually join them, but we were thinking about joining them, we had an Amish tutor, and she taught us. And that was like my only kind of in school experience. Like it was just us kids. Like there were 7 of us at the time that went to her school. It was like a little school building, and we had like hours and stuff. I didn't like that because I felt like, I could get a lot of school done in 3 hours. I could get a lot of school done in 3 hours. And here I was sitting in a classroom for 8 hours, and I had so much dead time because I just get my lessons done. And sometimes she'd let me do extra lessons, and sometimes she wouldn't. But finally, I just told her like partway through the school year, I was like, I'm just gonna graduate. So I did three grades that year, and just got done with school. And I read all the books in her library. I'd have like in my recess time, I'd argue with her and be like, all your history books say that the Amish should be this, and why are you guys like this instead? It was just, I don't know. It was a really fun year, but that was like my 1 year of school experience. The next year I went back and helped the lady assist. I assisted her teaching my younger siblings. So I still went back, but they only teach to 8th grade. So I finished 8th grade, and then I went back and helped teach my little siblings. And then the following years, once I finished like that Amish schooling, my parents were like, oh, you don't need to do any more schooling. But I continued to buy like college textbooks and would still get up at like early in the morning and do more school. And I for a while, I think like for a summer or two, not a summer, it might have been a summer, because we do school all year round. We never took breaks like a lot of people. We would take breaks because we traveled a lot. But because we traveled a lot, whenever we were like stationary in one place, we would do school. And so I think it was a summer, like a summer or two, I taught a couple of my little siblings, like 4 of my little brothers. Maybe it was just 3 of them. I taught them how to read and to do like the basic stuff. And one of them, I think, had mild dyslexia, so I had like a struggle with like teaching him. None of them were diagnosed. It was just kind of obvious that these kids are reading backwards and mixing everything up, and a lot more than that. But yeah, I did a lot with that. And then finally, when I was like, when I'd gone through all the textbooks that I felt like I needed to go to, I was like, okay, I'm ready to graduate. So I hosted my own graduation party. And then I went and got my own high set. There's no GED in Montana. I went and got my own high set. But so yeah, I was very like, my education was more kind of like I pursued it myself, and my mom wasn't. It was kind of like me and my mom headbutting, but it wasn't like she was anti-education. which is that she and I headbutted. With the rest of the kids, they didn't like school. She had to force them to do school. It was just like each of us have very different experiences with our schooling, and I like mine because I enjoyed the struggle.
So you graduated.
Donald,
You graduated top of your class, so congratulations.
Yes, I
I'm
made
curious.
my
The Amish teacher. I'm curious what that looked like. Like my my older daughter, I read to her a lot of like Laura Ingalls Wilder books and Anna Green Gables and books like that. And yeah, they have description of the schoolhouse where students have they have like a reader or a primer on each subject and they just work through them. Was it that style of teaching?
So
Or like, what did it look like?
yeah, so the funny thing is the books that Laura Wilder Ingalls used, Laura Ingalls Wilder, the books that she used are the books that we use in our everyday homeschooling. And my mom liked those books, like the McGuffey readers. I think it's on my bookshelf right behind me. You can't probably see them, but maybe you can actually. Anyway, somewhere up there behind me are the McGuffey readers that were the readers that they probably used back then, and also the math that they used, Strayer Upton math. We used that growing up in our, like, that was our part of our homeschool, like that mom would give us, and other things too. But in the Amish school, they use they have an Amish curriculum, or is Mennonite. I forget if it's Amish or Mennonite that they mostly use. Mostly Pathway. I think Pathways is Amish. I can't remember whether it's Amish or Mennonite. But we use that mostly in our Amish schoolroom setting, which is a little bit like there's some things I like about it, like some things are good about it, but also there are moments where you can tell that a non-English speaking person wrote this curriculum.
It's funny.
Yeah. But in general, it's a really good curriculum. Like they cover English really, really well for the most part. Like they diagram sentences. Like I did a lot of like English and diagramming and different things and like I did all sorts of curriculums. And I really do like how the pathways handle English, like the structure of English language. I learned a lot through that. More so than other English diagramming and English structure and stuff. They just present it in a really straightforward manner that was easy for me to understand. Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead. Did you have something else?
I think I just kind of rambled off into
That's okay. I was just gonna put Donald on the spot for a second. Didn't you also graduate early?
Yeah, I dropped out of high school after my sophomore year when I realized I could take the GED test in 4 hours instead of doing 2 more years of school. And I convinced my parents took a little
what
convincing.
precipitated that?
Well, my parents took a little convincing, but I sat him down and I was like, look, this is going to save us a lot of conflict. Like, if you force me to go to school next year, I'm just going to fail everything.
How did they say yes? That's the thing I don't understand.
Well, I think they realized that I'm pretty stubborn. And and that it would, I had a plan, and I think that they knew that there was they weren't going to talk me into doing it. So yeah, it was great. The GED test was sort of astonishingly easy. I don't know how. I was like, does everyone know about this? Like, how come everyone doesn't do this thing? I don't know. Maybe Ohio has made it harder now, but.
So it's like, it does kind of, like, the larger theme for me is just, I think the vast majority of people think you kind of have to be in these systems. However, a lot of people are butting up against these systems being like fundamentally like anti-human or something. I mean, there are certain aspects of certain schools, for example, that are just like truly feel like prison, and where you're stuck there and you can't leave and it's torture for you or whatever. And it's nice to just hear a story that there are alternatives if you just start thinking about them, and it's not actually that wild to pursue them.
Now, it was wild, like for the earlier generation.
Yeah.
Like it was a lot more wild. Like, it's very nice.
Homeschooling.
homeschooling, in many ways, things have become a lot more restrictive now than they were in the past, like especially post 9/11. But homeschooling is the counterexample to that. Homeschooling is the one example where it's become way
Normalized.
easier in almost every state in the country. There's some places in New England where it's still fairly restrictive, but in a lot of states in the country, you don't even need to register your kids for homeschooling. Like in Idaho and Tennessee, there are basically no rules. In where I live in Washington State, once my daughters are turn 8, we have to send a letter to the school district saying we're homeschooling this year.
It's pretty much
And
all you
that's
have to do.
it. And that's it. And so it's versus, but you know, when your parents and grandparents, that then it was, you know, it was sort of quasi legal, and there was, anyway, it was a whole it was a much stranger thing. But now the range of people who homeschool is much wider, and homeschool lobbies are fairly powerful. So they like in every couple of years, a lawmaker in Washington State tries to make the age go where you have to register your kids for homeschooling from 8 to 6. And then the homeschool moms mobilize against it and shut it down. So it's interesting for the homeschooling part. It's actually now pretty much a piece of cake. There's really nothing in the way of homeschooling your kids.
Yeah. I really think it's a fascinating topic. I love education a lot. I mean, like, I want to write my own curriculum. I have like it planned out to a T how I'm going to write it. And then I want to write a novel about like the early homeschooling movement, just because like they went through a lot of hardships in the 70s and 80s to get where we're at. And I actually am not a super big fan of exactly where we're at. Like, I still feel like there's a little, like, people are a little bit too compliant with the restrictions. Like, we shouldn't have to tell the state how many kids we're homeschooling and all these types of things. Like, I don't think we should have to do all this stuff. It's still a lot better than it was. Like, it's better to like give them a number of how many kids you have versus them coming and taking away your kids because you're homeschooling. But like, I want to write a novel about these experiences just to remind people of how much we went through, and like the fight isn't necessarily done if we're just willing to like let it go, you know, like we got to continue protecting this thing that we have and cherishing it. But yeah, I also like what Ashley said a little bit earlier, just about like the schools being kind of like a prison, and like kids not having a lot of the different things. It reminded me in like a different way of, have you guys read the book Educated by Tara Westover?
My wife read it.
I did not like that book for so many reasons. It inspired me to write my own autobiography though, which is kind of cool. But that book, I just found it so, what do you call it? Like, she was raised very much like me, where her mom didn't necessarily approve of her education, and she had to fight to get educated or whatever. And she was brought up without a social, without all that stuff. Pretty much the main differences between her story and my story, though, was the fact that her dad was abusive, and she was a spoiled brat. I felt like her dad wasn't just abusive; he also spoiled her rotten. But it was like kind of like back and forth, you know, like sometimes she was daddy's girl and other times like he was just really abusive. But what I saw that was in her story, she put a lot of the issues on the fact that, oh, her family was crazy and eccentric and it held her back, and she wasn't able to be educated because they didn't allow her to go to public school, and she just couldn't find time to do her schooling because there's so many chores, and you know, just like all this like bemoaning of how life was. And I just was like, I wanted to slap her really good and be like, where's your self responsibility? Like, in my family, we had a lot of chores too. I was the oldest of 12 kids. And there were times where my mom was sick and out, and I literally like had to homeschool the kids and keep the house clean and make all the meals, do all the bread. And I still managed to do 3 to 4 hours of school a day. And I still had time left over to read, like leisurely read, and like work on crafts that I wanted to work on. Like, the days are actually a pretty long day. Like, you can get a lot done in a day. And I don't know, there's just something about her story that just felt like a spoiled brat story. It was like, you know, like you could still do your chores and you could still make time for yourself to do your school, and you can have fun. Like, I think she put the focus in the wrong place, where like like she just didn't have like super healthy parents is what her problem was.
Yeah, and I would add, like, there was this guy a while back on Twitter who now has blocked me because we've gotten butt heads so many times, but he wrote this long thread about how he grew up in a homesteading family and his parents were abusive and the amount of chores he had to do were like implemented in an abusive way, et cetera, et cetera. The upshot was supposed to be that homesteading is somehow abusive to children. And I was like, I mean, this just sounds like an abusive family culture. Like, you could have people in a city treating their kid like that via chores, and just they're not farm chores, they're something else, or some sort of controlled activity, and that would also be abusive. That doesn't mean like living in the city is abusive. So I think a lot of people do this thing where they like conflate when someone is different or doing something outside of the box, and then if there's like any unhealthy aspect to it, they're gonna just like, and especially in the case of homeschooling or anything like that's related to traditional marriage or livelihood, or like keeping house or anything like that, it's just like there's a huge audience for grievance around that, like, oh, look how repressive this is to women, or whatever. And on that note, I'm wondering what your perspective is towards marriage and family now, because I know that you said you were butting heads with your mom about it before. And also I wonder, and I'm curious what you think, but like this experience of like being the mom basically of the, teaching the younger siblings, did that make you want to be a mom yourself, or did it burn you out? Like, where are you at with that right now?
Okay, so I will say that all teenagers go through a phase of being really bitter and really like anti whatever is around them, and I definitely went through that phase. Yeah. But I was always usually pretty self-aware, and I realized like, oh, I just hate my siblings right now. I don't actually hate kids.
Yeah.
And once I had like a separation and I started traveling more, I got that break and I got that relief that I needed. And I was like, okay, like I could have some kids. And like I definitely at this point in life, like I wasn't ever like anti-marriage. I was just like, I'm gonna say something to make my mom really mad. And I mean that's what I would do. Like I just like to annoy her because I wanted to just like, let me alone, let me write, let me read. Like it's not feministic of me to want to do this stuff. Mm-hmm. So but yeah, I just had to work through things myself and realize like I could do different things. Like I could be a writer and I could be a mother at the same time. And at this point in life, like I look back and I look through different things like, oh yeah, those were hard experiences, but I'm really thankful for those experiences because it taught me a lot and I learned a lot, and it's made me more capable and more responsible and also more aware of a lot of different things. And I've been able to take different things and realize like Tara Westover in her book, like I could either look at this experience and be like, oh, that was super toxic and so bad, or I could be grateful and realize I actually learned a lot from that, and it's made me who I am, and I like who I am, and I'm not going to turn my back on that. And in some ways, I want my kids to have a very similar experience. So yeah, I do want to have a lot of kids, and I don't know what a lot means. Like at this point, maybe 8. I mean, definitely no less than 8.
No less than 8. Oh my god.
I would get so bored. I'm the oldest of so many kids. When I nanny, I've done a lot of nannying in the last, not recent, but like in my early 20s, I did a lot of nannying. And whenever I had like just 2 kids, it was so much harder to keep those kids entertained versus in whether I had like 6 or 7 kids. Sometimes I would be like, can I bring my siblings to work just so that I wouldn't get bored? I needed more kids to make things more alive and more like fresh. So yeah, I do want quite a few kids. I want a more traditional route. Like my lifestyle in general is kind of like this blend of being old fashioned but modern at the same time. And I'm not about being progressive, but I like for things to work how they are. Like I love my open mics, but I'm the person who shows up wearing really full linen skirts, Like I like I like that blend of traditional and current times being fit together in like this way that works. If you're like family upbringing, yeah, I want to marry a decent Christian guy. I want there to be a little bit diversity, like in faith and stuff, just because I think it's healthier for the kids and it keeps the kids from being put into this box. Like mom and dad both think exactly this way, and if I don't think exactly this way, then they're gonna like shun me and excommunicate me. Like I want to like keep that. Like I want there to be cohesiveness and unity, but also some like differences of opinions that they can like see up front and be like, okay, it's also okay for me to have a different opinion. I just have to like be respectful and like express this in a way that works for me, but doesn't isolate, like, like somehow incorporate your heritage into like who you're gonna be, basically. Like I want to. That's kind of my goal.
I assume you're also your family doesn't do marriage licenses.
No, yeah.
That's awesome.
No. Yeah.
Oh, so many different ways we could go. Well, on the topic of education, you're starting a program. Maybe this would be a good time to talk about that.
Yeah.
And then I'm curious, as you describe this program, maybe afterwards, I'm curious to hear about your idea for a homeschool curriculum and the outlines of what that would look like. So you could do which either one you want first, and then we'll do the one after that.
Okay, sounds good. I'll start with the girls' school. They're both very different topics, so yeah, definitely one than the other. So I used to work for a ministry called Above Rubies. I don't know if you've heard of them. Nancy Campbell. They're not really affiliated with No Greater Joy, but a lot of people conflate them as being similar ministries, and they are very similar ministries. But Above Rubies is a Nancy Campbell edits and prints this magazine called Above Rubies, and it's designed to encourage and inspire stay-at-home mothers of large families in particular. But it's not just for them; it's just for any woman that has that desire to be a mother and to raise children. And all sorts of women of all sorts of walk of life read this magazine and are encouraged by it, inspired by it. I did office work and I helped with like the behind the scenes stuff. And I worked for them for about maybe a year, but I have a lot of friends there, so I travel back and forth a lot. And she has a lot of volunteers in and out. And one day when I was there, I was talking to a couple of the girls there, and they were really disappointed in their experience at Above Rubies because they thought that they were going there to learn how to cook and to clean and to do like womanly things that were described in this magazine. And all they were doing was sitting at this computer editing this magazine and answering mothers' calls and like selling books and selling CDs. And of course, like if they were to like read the description of what they were volunteering for, they would have realized it was office work. Like when I went, I knew it was office work. But sometimes young girls just like sign up for a ministry thinking, oh, I'm going to go learn how to cook and to clean. And I was like, no, that's not what this is about. You're not coming to learn to cook and clean. So I was talking to Mrs. Campbell about it later that day, and was like, there should be something for these girls. Like they're coming all this way. Like it's kind of sad that they're not having these needs met. Like they're being raised in conservative families by mothers who are reacting against a lifestyle, and they weren't equipped with any tools, so they really haven't got anything to pass on to their daughters. They don't know how to cook and clean. They don't know how to sew or mend or any of this stuff, and yet they're being told, they're teaching their daughters that this is the way to be a woman, and yet these girls have no idea how to learn this because they can't learn it from their mother who's telling them this is what they need to do, and there's no one else to teach them. Like it's really sad there's nothing out there. And Mrs. Campbell was like, you know what, Keturah, I've been thinking this for a while, but you should be opening a school by now. Like you have a house and girls and you like have a community. Like, why haven't you done this yet? And I was like, oh, I haven't got time for that. I travel too much. Like, there's no way I could do that. But she was like, I think you should do it. And she's just like, she's got this like charismatic force to her. And she's just like, you should do this. So I thought about it for 2 years and I finally decided to do it. And I did a lot of networking and different things. But the idea though is that girls come and live with me for 2 weeks. And during these 2 weeks, they get a crash course, a very hard, intense crash course of what it looks like to run a home. We're going to start out with like getting up at a decent time. So like 6:30. For me, I usually get up a little bit earlier. Like I love to get up at 5 o'clock, but like we're going to start out with like getting up at 6:30 and going to bed by 10:30. We're going to do meals, like just simple meals. This isn't about learning to become a professional cook or a really great baker. This is just learning the basics. Like let's make some basic bread. Let's make some eggs. Let's just make some basic wholesome meals together. And then let's learn how to clean up after ourselves. Let's clean up our mess. So the first day or two, we're just going to be cleaning and cooking and being with each other and getting up at a decent time, taking afternoon walks. In the evening, we're going to be reading together. Then we're going to like start making things together. We're going to start with a needle and thread and like learn how to sew by hand and mend a few things. And then we're going to go thrift shopping and find things that don't fit. And we're going to make these things fit with a machine alterations. And then we're going to like get some old sheets and learn how we can make these old sheets into like skirts and aprons and tea towels and things like that. And then in the evenings while we're reading, we're going to incorporate like multitasking, and we're going to learn how to knit while we're reading. And like just like those types of things. And I'm going to like be encouraging girls to wear less synthetic fibers and to get outside some more and just clean up after themselves, and don't put these ideas on themselves like, oh, I'm just not a good cleaner, so I don't clean my room. Like, no, we're a woman, we're people, we're humans, we can clean. Like, we can clean, we can keep our messes like tidy, like our space tidy. And we all have fingers. We can learn to use these fingers to like do different things, like to knit and to sew. And at first it's gonna be awkward, but that's okay. Like, we're gonna like, so yeah, that's just like the gist of it. It's just like learning to be more capable, realizing that we are more capable than we realize that we are. Not speaking that like over ourselves, like, oh, I'm just like not a house cleaner. Like, no, we're all house cleaners. We can all keep our space clean. Speaking different things over ourselves and learning like a different sort of confidence. And like, it's a crash course, like 2 weeks. You can't learn everything in 2 weeks, but you can be inspired and be equipped in the basics and then go home and grow from there.
I love that so much. I, like, just speaking as somebody who grew up where I learned some homemaking skills, but definitely not to the point of like sewing anything ourselves or knitting anything. This sounds lovely. And yes. I can hear people, just today I'm fighting with some feminists on Twitter. I can hear them saying like, this is so repressive, this is so backwards. I don't think that, but what is your response to that?
Yeah. So it's never backwards to be capable. It's never backwards to be capable. If you cannot mend your own shirt as a feminist, then you're just a broken person. Like, even a feminist, even a man should be able to sew a button onto his shirt. You know what I mean? Like, these are skills that should not be just for women. These are beyond that. And something else I'm going to be focusing, a huge focus of the school that I forgot to cover because like it's such a big focus, is hospitality. Because this isn't just about a woman being able to take care of her home. It's about a woman being able to have a home, or not even a home, a space, because you don't need a lot of space. You don't need a lot of resources to be hospitable. But it's about learning what it means to be generous and hospitable and being capable enough to do that and having that spirit and that grace inside of you of being open. And there's going to be a huge focus on planned hospitality and spontaneous hospitality, where like, and that really, really, I've had so many feministic type women, like even butch, like feminist women, come into my home and be like, this is the most comfortable place I've ever been, and I don't want to leave. I feel inspired. I watch these women become soft in my presence. Like it just like, there's something about hospitality that awakens in every person the need for like, oh yes, this is what I want. This is what I want. And so like the idea of spontaneous hospitality, like maybe the girls and I will be like canning a bunch of apple jam or strawberry jelly or something someday. I don't know what exactly it will be like on that specific day. We'll be canning some sort of preserve or doing some sort of like project or any time of the day. And my friends know that this is their part of the program. They're just going to walk into my house and be like, oh, hi, I came for a visit. And the girls at first they're going to observe, and then they're going to help and perform this spontaneous hospitality, like where we drop what we're doing or we incorporate our friends, our new unexpected guests, make them feel welcome, incorporate them into what we're doing, and perform this spontaneous hospitality where the people who just walked in feel like they're a part of us too now. And that's what community is about, is like including those unexpected moments into the broader scheme of the everyday.
My God, I love this so much. Donald, you can go, but I just love this so much. I feel like you can just talk until you're blue in the face about like conviviality and community, but like what it actually takes to get there is to like practically think and be empathetic to a person in front of your face. Like, what are their expectations here in this house, in this moment, and how can I make them feel comfortable, and how can I make this space feel fun and like joyful for everybody who's here, and not feel like a strain, or not feel like, you know, when your guests leave your house, you're like, oh my God, thank God they left. Instead, you're just like, that was super fun, that was energizing, I had such a good time. It takes quite a bit of empathy to do that, and quite a bit of selflessness, but in a way that really can add it can energize everybody involved if you do it right. But it's a skill. Like, it is totally a skill. So it's really, I love the idea that you're going to have your students there and then spontaneous guests, and they just have to like adapt.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
everyone's gonna be like, oh shit, what do we do? I love that so much because it really is a skill. And once you learn how to do it, it becomes second nature. But if you don't know how to do it and you're from this culture of like call ahead and you get here at 3, and from the period of time from 1 to 3 before your guests arrive, you're like putting everything out and running around crazy, and it's like such a strain, and it's so stressful, as opposed to like, oh no, they just showed up, so like let's do it, let's all make it happen, let's move, let's be empathetic. Donald, sorry, you go. I'm hogging the mic.
No, it's okay. I knew what to expect when I asked you to the co-host.
It's always like 2 to 1. I know. Even when I'm like, take the lead, it's always me like 2 to 1. Sorry.
No, that's okay. You started this thing, Ashley, so it's all right.
You'll allow it.
Yeah, I'm just laughing thinking about this, about my own family, how I think I like having people over a lot more than my wife does, or I like having more people over at once. And so I last summer, we don't have a very big yard, but I threw like a big potluck last summer where it was like packed to the gills. It was awesome. I had a great time. And then my wife afterwards was like, yeah, that was like 2 times as many people as it should have been. But anyway, it was fun. Potlucks are really the cheating way, because it's scalable. It doesn't matter how many people show up, sort of the food grows with them. But maybe, I don't know, maybe Keturah, potlucks break the rules of proper hospitality because you're making people bring food.
Yeah, what do you think?
I'm personally a fan of potlucks. A lot of people aren't, because I think it breaks the rules of hospitality. In my house, I tell people you don't have to worry. Like, bring something if you absolutely want to, but even if you don't, there's going to be enough. Like, I will make sure there's enough food. But like if I do a wedding or something, I'm definitely doing a potluck, probably, just because I want to invite so many people. I don't think I can afford to like feed 500 to 600 people at a wedding. But yeah.
My big thing is with potlucks though is that if someone has a baby, they don't have to bring food. That's what I always tell people. A friend who has like, a 4-month-old or something, I'm just like, they say, oh, what should I bring? Like, bring the baby.
Yes.
Like, that's it. And I think like the person with the youngest baby has to be catered to.
I like that.
In terms of the timing of things, whatever, Okay, well, man, there's so many different things to talk about. I'm curious, like, how many girls are you wanting to have at this program at a time?
Yeah.
Like, how are you? Do you have bunk beds? Like, what's your setup?
So I have an extra bedroom in my house that I currently sleep in, but I'm gonna move into a smaller bedroom, and then my bedroom I'm gonna put 2 or 3 sets of bunk beds in, and then the smaller room will probably also fit a set of bunk beds. I don't usually sleep on a bed. Actually, I personally sleep on like a floor mattress, just because I'm not a fan of beds. But and there's currently no beds in my house, so like I'm in the process of like bringing bunk beds in and setting that up. But there's going to be like a little dorm, and then a couple girls will be with me. I think I can handle 6 girls at a time. I'm saying 4 to 6 girls, but I'll probably take about 6 girls at a time, just because I think that will be like the maximum that I could actually focus on making sure each girl has some one-on-one quality time.
And how old? Like, what's the age range?
14 to 20s.
Amazing. Something with education I think about. I've been trying to start a school here with limited success. But that I think a lot about old British style education, where you'd go to the home of someone and you'd live there. And like, if you read C.S. Lewis's memoir, he has a description of this. He goes to live at some old guy's house, and he wakes up every morning and goes down. The old guy makes him like learn ancient Greek and whatever. and that was the model of education. So he wasn't in a school building. I mean, he was rooming with someone, and then the teacher would just have a couple students boarding with him and teach. It's a really interesting model, which I think would be I mean, you're doing a different style thing, but I like that home-based education where you're homeschooling others has a great history. And it's a good model. I'm curious about your homeschool curriculum. You say you have it all planned out in your head. So you don't have to walk us through the whole thing, but just could you give a general outline? I mean, you have an interesting experience in your own life with it. And it's also interesting, I haven't read the Tara Westover book. My wife read it and described it. If I remember right, she ends up like going to Oxford
Yeah.
and being wildly successful. And I think it's interesting how I think homeschooling, even when done badly or not very well, usually is more interesting or better than public schooling. And that even though she had a parents who were abusive in various ways, nonetheless, she ends up being wildly successful. That her terrible upbringing, which she I'm sure was truly terrible in many ways, nonetheless, probably she learned way more doing that than if she had just done the regular K through 12. So in any
Yeah.
case, let's hear about your homeschool curriculum idea.
Yeah, my basic idea is that it would be so simple that it wouldn't frustrate young boys or people who just have a little bit of trouble with learning disabilities, but would also allow for like room for people who just want to learn more. The idea though is, and this my curriculum is mostly targeted at like grades 3 to maybe 6 or 7. Like it's just a core kind of like those few grades. And the idea is that before those couple of grades, I would mostly do like flashcards and like have the kids working with me, and they'd mostly through flashcards they would learn their multiplication tables and their division, addition, and subtraction, and ABCs and sounds. Like all that would be learned through flashcards before this. And then I would have just like some basic material where they would start practicing putting sounds together, just like two sounds together, a consonant and a vowel on pieces of paper. And they would do that maybe for like an hour a day, but this however so. So once they've mastered that, I would kind of start into this curriculum, which would be where I would write out this lesson that would be based in like history or science. And you have basically the idea is that in this one lesson, you have all the subjects. And you have your history or your science and your geography lesson that you're reading. And you're reading about this thing. And in this thing, it's asking you like to think critically and about different things. Like you're not just reading about the historical event, but you're also like reading a little bit of science and a little bit of this. And at the end of this like reading lesson that you are like learning all these comprehension skills, you have like this list of questions. And this list of questions, these questions are mathematical, and they also have to do with like with English and grammar. And then you'll be graded like on your spelling and on your penmanship. So like all your grading on that stuff will happen like in these answers that are being asked, and like as you're working them out. Like maybe like there's only like 15, 20 answers, like there's not a lot. And then like you kind of like work on the different, like maybe you have a little more struggle with math, so like you take that math problem that you had with, and then you have a page of like just working out those different similar type math equations a little bit more in depth. And then maybe like once a week or so you write a few paragraphs or a couple pages on what you have been reading, what you've been researching, which is kind of like gives you some more practice writing and thinking, and just a little more research and a little bit more in depth into like the history or the geography or the science of the subjects that you have been like reading about that week. That's kind of like my general idea, is like somehow to make all the subjects into one subject, which makes it more practical and a little bit more easy for kids to understand, and makes it a little bit more interesting also, because they're not just like reading about this random history thing or this random like doing these random math equations, but it's like actually fitting together and making sense into like a larger picture. And then which I think would be very helpful for a lot of boys, and just in general, like I have this idea that a lot of boys shouldn't be doing a lot of school until they're like 12 years old anyways. Like they should be doing basics, but they should be having like a lot of hands-on skills. And a lot of boys like they feel bad because they're like, oh, I can't read and I'm almost 14 years old. And that's usually when it starts clicking and all of a sudden they just like read really quickly. Whereas like a young girl, she might, like that doesn't like general, because one of my sisters had dyslexia too. But like in general, the boys in my family weren't really able to read much until they were like 12, 14. Whereas as girls were like reading when we were like 5, 6, and 7. And so I just kind of like want to cater to that. I have this idea that I'll have lots of boys and no girls. So maybe that's kind of like what I'm thinking. Like writing this homeschool curriculum for just boys. And then if I have any girls, they'll be like me and they can just like go teach themselves.
Oh my
It was
God, that's
fascinating. My older daughter did a co-op preschool, which was neat because the parents we were all helping out with it, and it was very clear that no one had any idea what to do with the little boys,
Mm-hmm.
and they shouldn't have been in there. I was like,
Yeah.
these kids should just be running around. That's what they wanted to do. They should just be outside running around. My daughter loved it. It was like, oh, here's an activity. She sat down and did the activity and just very happily followed whatever the directions were, and she had a great time. And yeah, anyway, it was fascinating. I was like, oh, this teacher doesn't have even the slightest idea what to do with these little boys, and they're nice. They were nice little boys, but.
It just kind of indicates to me too that like the way we do schooling, at least in the majority of the US, is just it's just so very one size fits all, and it's not very adaptive to like these differences. And it is pretty obvious, at least to me, like there should be no forced like sit down and do X, Y, and Z curriculum thing until like 7 or 8.
Yeah.
There could be like optional ones, like, oh, we're going to do this in this little corner, but like just a lot of play-based differences between boys and girls for sure. Also just differences between kids. Like my older daughter, once she gets going on something that she's like interested in and passionate about, she doesn't want to be interrupted and brought to the next thing. Like she's into it, she's making some art or she's drawing something or she's trying to write something. And then it's like, okay, well, that's done now. We have to move on to this next thing. She's like, but like, I'm really into this. I'm doing really well with it. I don't want to stop. And that was a big struggle for her when she was like in preschool, 3 and 4 years old.
Big
It was
Maria
like
Montessori thing. Maria Montessori is like, oh, children have an amazing capacity for attention and focus, and you should not interrupt them.
Yep, absolutely. So I mean, I think and that's something I don't know. I go back and forth with schooling and homeschooling. I feel like homeschooling is better than most schooling options, at least in the US, because of that, because of the like specificity you can give to each kid, and like how much of the day in regular school is spent on just like getting people to sit still and pay attention, as opposed to actually teaching them anything. So you don't actually need that much time. Like Keturah, you were saying how much schooling you can get done in 3 hours. It's actually kind of crazy if you're like sitting there focused on the thing. But I like also struggle because I think there is something worthwhile, at least at a certain age, to have children be among peers and have to adapt to an authority figure who isn't the parent. Now that school isn't the only place to get that. You could get that in church or like Sunday school or sports or something like that. But I do think that that's an important thing too. Like, cause I have had a few friends who who are homeschoolers who spent most of the time around their siblings and parents. And then were like a little awkward, not to perpetuate the stereotype that homeschoolers are awkward, but like if they didn't spend a lot of time with other authority figures, that would be like I just prefer to be with my family type personality. I don't know.
I'm not really sure why we weren't awkward, because we didn't go to like anything. We didn't have homeschool co-ops. We didn't do churches or anything. Growing up, sometimes we lived around my family and I had like cousins around, but I was like the oddball out because everyone was way younger than me. And my aunts were like, oh, you're one of the kids, so you can't hang out with us either. So I was like kind of in this middle place where like, oh, I'm too old to be with the cousins and too young to be with the aunts. But I think probably what helped us was like going back to the hospitality and part is like that was just a part of our upbringing. Like we always had a lot of people living with us, a lot of different sorts of people living with us. There was one time in my life, it was like one of my favorite years of my life. 9 years old, we lived in this little Missouri farm, and we had an Italian couple with their baby living with us, a Mexican family with their 4 kids living with us. Oh, I should tell you where they're living with us, because we live in a mobile home with a small addition. So my parents and a couple of little kids were in their room. All of us, the kids, there were probably like 6 of us at the time, were in our girls' room. So like two of us girls and maybe 2 boys. No, it's probably just 4 of us kids. The little ones were probably mom and dad's room. So 2 of us girls and 2 of us boys in our girls' room. The Mexican family with the 4 kids were in the boys' room. The Italian family with their kid was in sometimes was in one of the rooms back and forth with the family before they came, but then they moved into like a little camper outside. We had an uncle living in our pantry. We had a young single guy living on our couch. We had another couple living in a camper out in our yard, and everyone ate together in the kitchen.
Wait, who were the Mexican and Italian families? How did they find you?
Yeah.
I don't know. Like my grandpa during his time of life, he was a traveling evangelical. He lived in a bus for many years with his 9 kids, traveling across the state, preaching to any church that would have him. He literally looked through a phone directory, like call churches and be like, "Do you need someone to give you a sermon this week?" And they would give him a sermon. I mean, they would like, "Oh yeah, sure, come on over," or like, "No," and then he'd stay there for a while and like preach to the different churches in the area. So like our family is very charismatic and knows a lot of people. And my dad kind of like has carried on that charisma and just knows a lot of people. And if people know that if anyone needs help, send them to John Lamb. Like that's the guy you go to. And so I don't know, these families knew of us through some sort of religious affiliation movement that my grandpa had been a part of. And they heard about my dad and they were like, we need a place to stay, we need work. And my dad ran a construction roofing business, and so he had jobs and he had a place to live. I mean, like most people wouldn't think we had a place to live, but we had a place to live. Like I said, you don't need resources.
So okay, so that's why you weren't awkward. I mean, just having to spend time with people who aren't your immediate family and like try to meet them where they're at, I think is like that's the thing that I keep coming back to with school, is just like some experience where because a lot of people don't, like most people don't have this huge extended family. Most people don't have like the experience of hosting like, you know, other families in their home. And so to me, like that's just an important part of upbringing, is that kind of you know, just ability to relate to people outside your immediate family. Not that there's not other ways to get it outside of school.
And it definitely wasn't easy. Like I wouldn't say that sort of lifestyle was always easy. There were definitely moments where we like hated it. And like where Donald was talking earlier about like how it's exhausting. Like there are days where I still get exhausted, where I'll host people. Like people just know they can come to my place whenever. And so sometimes there's a week where people come every single day and I haven't got like hardly a free moment ever. And I'm just like so exhausted. But like I have like inside of me, I like know like I'm just exhausted. This is just me. Like these are good friends. I'm glad they're here. They'll leave eventually and then I can relax. But I'm not gonna be like all of a sudden this rude, grumpy person because like my friends are visiting me. Like I'm glad my friends are visiting me here right now. And also like when they get to be better friends, I can be like, oh, I'm kind of tired. Do you want to put the teapot on right now? Like, I don't know. Like, you know, you just get more comfortable with each other. And like you can still make different things work. And it's okay to be exhausted. It's okay to like go through these times. Like I'm an extroverted person who like hates people a lot. And I don't mean like I hate people a lot, but like I just sometimes I get tired of people. And I just am aware of that and allow that to be, and just allow it to not like consume how I interact with people.
In my teens and early 20s, I've never lived alone. I realized at some point. So I left high school after 2 years and I got my GED, and then I went down to New Orleans with some friends, and we lived in a tent in a guy's backyard. It was like after the hurricanes, you know, we were helping out and doing stuff, and that was kind of interesting. New Orleans is a wild place. And then I came back home, and my parents basically said, well, you know, okay, time to move out. I was like, yeah, you're right. Okay. And so I moved to Kentucky, and I was renting a room for $60 a month, which is amazing. And it was the middle room of a shotgun apartment. So I would just put my mattress up against the wall during the day so people could walk through, And then eventually some guys, we got this house, and it was always unclear how many people were living there at any given time. And the house was kind of terrible and gross in many ways. We could have used your school. I think we weren't very good at we were a bunch of single guys. I don't know. We weren't very good at homemaking. But then there would always be just strange people living there. Like this woman from Israel came and lived with us, and we'd do concerts in the basement. And in many ways it was terrible, but it was never boring. It was never boring. There was always something happening. There were always strange people coming to visit. There were always people in the living room. Any time of day, there was someone up doing something. And it was a great experience. I was very happy when I left, but it was also, I never did the like normal college thing. I went to college. By the time I went to college, I was in my mid-20s and didn't live on campus or anything like that. But that was my kind of college years, I guess, was living in like weird punk houses and doing that. But I just remember what life was at that age was just spending time with friends all the time. And we would all try to work as little as possible and live really cheaply and just spend time together and make music. And it was in Kentucky on Bourbon Avenue in Lexington, Kentucky. I wonder what Bourbon Avenue looks like now. There were like 3 different houses that were being rented out by friends. And so there were just people around. I don't know. And I feel like so much young people now, it's very isolated that they aren't around friends and so on a lot. And I feel really terrible for them. Because it seems so important to, I don't know. It sounds like you had an interesting experience where you were maybe starved for peers your age a little bit with your siblings and cousins being a lot younger, but that there were still a lot of people around. But then as soon as you could, you kind of hit the road and built up that that community, that scene of people your age. So here's a totally different question. You lived in Missouri for up until 16, then you moved to Montana. I'm really curious about place and how it affects thinking and life. I'm curious how you could contrast the 2 places.
Yeah.
Like life in Missouri versus life in Montana and how it's changed your thinking and approach to life. 2 really different regions.
Yeah. That's a good question. I was such a young kid in Missouri, and we didn't have much of a social life. And I remember, like, as a young kid, I would always be very upset about that. And I was always like, I wanted to go to church. I was just like looking for ways to have friends. So in Missouri, we had family and we had people living with us. And every now and then we'd go to a church, and every now and then I'd make friends. But then we'd move, because even in Missouri, we moved a lot. We moved probably like a dozen times before I was 16. And I would just keep in contact with people through the letters, but it wasn't like the same thing. I felt like I was always like, oh, just as soon as I met a friend, I was like, oh yeah, I have a friend, someone my age, and then we'd move. And I was like, oh, now I gotta start all over. So moving to Montana didn't really feel that different than the experiences I was already having, because it was just like another move, had to start all over. But in some ways, it was kind of like I did not want to move to Montana. I was 16, so like I didn't want to leave Missouri. I liked Missouri. I liked how many people there were in Missouri. There was a lot of people versus Montana, which is like open space, no trees, hardly any people. Absolutely no chance of me ever making a friend in Montana. Like that's how I viewed it as a 16-year-old. I was just like, oh, I'm just gonna like be so lonely out there in Montana. We won't have family. We'll just be us. So I wasn't super enthused about it. And to be honest, like even after I started building community, I always said I hated Montana until like 3 or 4 years ago. When I went to Germany, that's when I realized like, oh, I actually like Montana. I don't know what it was that clicked about it, but like some point in Germany, I realized like when I went back to the States, I wanted to go back to Montana, not Missouri. And I eventually made a road trip to Missouri, and I realized like the culture in Missouri versus Montana. I hadn't realized this as a kid, but Montana is a much cleaner state. Like when you drive down the road, you don't see trash alongside the highways, in the ditches and stuff. And in Missouri, I went back for the first time in life when I was like 22, 23 or something, somewhere around there on a road trip. And I realized like, it's just like, oh, this place is dirty. This place is dirty. I'm so glad I don't live here. Like everything about it is dirty. Like even the people are like different. There's like the way they dress, and there's just more class in Montana. And I guess I had grown accustomed to that without realizing that. And like it seemed like a bad thing to say, but I kind of like the fact that people are a little bit classier and cleaner in Montana versus Missouri. That's the main difference I see it standing out. It's not a true like one size fits all, because I still have a lot of really good friends and family in Missouri, and they're totally decent people, and they're not like the type of people that just throw trash alongside the roads. But that's like just like, you know what I mean? Like that's just kind of part of the atmosphere, and you kind of get used to it, and it's kind of how it is. Montana, I feel like also in the long run, it was probably a little bit easier for me to make long-term friends, just because there's less people. When you meet people, their differences don't matter as much. And there are a lot of different types of people in Montana. And in Montana, I have quite a few friends, and not any of them are very much like me. Like all my friends that are very much like me are like live elsewhere. Like I have a friend in North Carolina and a friend in Kentucky. Probably my best friends like are in other states, and I go and visit them a lot and talk to them a lot and all that kind of stuff. But like the friends in Montana I have are nothing at all like me, except for like we kind of like appreciate outdoors and being off grid or a little bit out of the system, and just like we have a lot of community values, and like we get along great, and they're like they come over and I go over, and like we just have a really good community life, which is kind of what friendships are about, is like that community.
I have a blog post I read that was funny, but it was about hiking with a friend who turns to you and says, "So, are you a domestic terrorist?" Like she kind of put things together, and of course said, "Well, no, I'm not a terrorist." But what I loved about the story is the fact that even with that one question in her mind, she was still hanging out with you.
Oh, you read? Yeah, yeah. A friend did ask me that. I was like, I thought you said a friend asked you that. I was about to say,
No,
oh,
a friend asked you that. Yeah,
Yeah.
but what I loved about the story is that she was kind of worried about this, but not too worried. She was still hiking with you.
Oh, that was so funny. She was helping me design a website for a cleaning thing I was doing a while back. Oh, that I forgot about. That was hilarious. So she was living with another friend, and it was kind of like a compound situation. And then she just realized, like, my family, we live on like it's considered a compound, kind of like we're not like dangerous, but it's considered a compound. And she just started realizing like all the people around us in Montana were like no socials, kind of anti-government. This isn't my family, but like a couple other families in the area were like talking about like starting all these militias. Like my dad's pacifist, so he's like not into the militia movement. But like there was like a lot of militia movements coming up, and then she heard about the sovereign citizen movement and knew that we were kind of like loosely connected to that because of not having socials. And so she did some research, and the first thing that comes up under sovereign citizen, or like along with it, is domestic terrorist. And she was like, "Are you guys domestic terrorists?" Because of the fact that we didn't have socials. And then she was like, "I feel like you're the only person I could actually ask that and not offend."
The most normal, relatable domestic terrorist there is.
Mm-hmm. It really freaked her out though. She didn't stay very much longer because everyone else just freaked her out by like all their anti-establishment talk. She ended up moving back to California.
I just want to go back briefly before we wrap up. Donald, when you were talking about your house in Kentucky, I was thinking about this time I went to Spain to visit some friends who were squatting in like the old city. And it was like a bunch of people who just came to Barcelona to like as tourists, and then like found each other, and then were like squatting in this old apartment that was like old money that was just left abandoned. The way they got in was just like to push the window open and put their hand inside and like unlock it. Nobody had a key. and they would pass out flyers for like bars to make like a few bucks to buy themselves food that day or alcohol. And that I stayed there for like 2 days, and I was like, oh my god, this is too much. Like I just cannot with these people. And they were like during the day on unicycles in the park, like playing guitar. I was like, even then, anti-hippie. But I do think that there was like a moment where we were all sharing dinner that was like cobbled together from everyone's various small amounts of money, that I thought like it is really beautiful and convivial to like make these kind of spaces. I wish they weren't such freaks, these particular people, but you know what I mean. And I had some similar experiences in college, and it's funny you mentioned that. Like I think that that's another communal experience a lot of people have, where you're living near each other and everyone's like chipping in, you know, to make things work, or to find something to eat, or you know, buy some beer together or whatever. And just spending a lot of time together, and there's just always somebody around. And I think that's like kind of our natural state, is to just have this feeling like there's like this buzziness, like there's always something going on, but then like nobody will judge you if you step away and have like a private space or moment. Like it's okay. And that, I mean, that's kind of what it feels like in a family too, you know, just being around, and there's always something to do. But anyways, I just wanted to tell that story because I haven't ever told it, and I thought very similar kind of experience. But I also think a lot of young people, like, you could make something happen, like Donald's crazy, terrible / also good experience. I think a lot of young people are also like seeking that type of experience, and like, you know, if you can do like Keturah, and you can find your people who are like you and willing to try these things and make community. I think, like, you know, I think for a lot of people, just to know that is an experience you've had, Keturah, I've had, Donald's had, like, that it exists, and it's something that you could do in your, you know, younger years and experience. I do wish that we've talked about this a bunch, Donald, but I do wish we had that kind of like general feeling outside of youth into family life. It's hard to find it because you really do have to make sure that you're around really stable people, and the community, the understanding of how things work in the community needs to be really clear once kids are involved. So it's harder to do that, like to remake that. But anyways, I just think it's kind of inspiring to do that kind of crazy stuff while you're young.
I think something I like a lot about what you're doing with this school you're starting, Keturah, is that, and I think one of the reasons why my experience in that house was a lot more negative than it could have been, is that a lot of these things, community, conviviality, are really practical skills. They're not abstract ideas. It's pretty much every single person agrees with the abstract ideas. Friendship and community are good. Okay. No one disagrees with that, virtually. But then the practical skills to make that happen are often missing. So I went and traveled for 5 or 6 weeks when I was living at that house, and no one did dishes the entire time I was gone, you know? So this woman from Israel and my now wife, like, did all the dishes in the bathtub because they were just so disgusted. My wife wasn't even living there. Anyway, it was bad, you know, things sort of broke down. Or we had this like compost, we were composting in the backyard, but it was just, you know, it wasn't actually well done compost pile, so it was just rotting junk. And you know what I mean? If you lack those skills, it doesn't matter how dedicated you are to the abstraction of community, it just doesn't work terribly well. And so anyway, I think that's great what you're doing. So I have one last question maybe we could wrap up with, and we'll link to your various things that you want us to at the bottom if people want to find your writing and contact you. But in the talk I heard you give, you said you know, you said a number of siblings you had, and half of us wear shoes and the other half don't. And I'm curious, which half are you part of?
I'm definitely the half that doesn't wear shoes.
Oh,
I have traveled for months not wearing shoes. I even was in New York City for 5 days. This is like, I'll tell you, like the epitome of my not wearing shoes. And I didn't wear shoes the whole time in New York City. I don't wear shoes anywhere. Like they're so restricted. The only time I wear shoes is if I'm cold. And unfortunately I get cold more often than I'd like, especially living in Montana. Like if there's snow and it's cold, I wear shoes. But otherwise, yeah, I'm definitely and when I was being abstract when I said half of us don't wear shoes. I mean, do wear shoes because really none of us wear shoes.
that's
Yeah.
great.
We were wild ruffians as little kids, and it still kind of shows.
Well, I think that's a
I love
good
that.
note to end on. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This is so much fun.